De Niro at the end of that fight with the three guys in Cape Fear. Like
I can out-philosophize you, counselor.
It's going to take a hell of a lot more than that, counselor, to prove you're better than me.
I thought you were going to say De Niro at the end of Raging Bull. That would knock me down, Ray.
Yeah. Well, Ray didn't knock him down.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. was supplying. I'm sure most people know the basics of the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, but it lasted.
You'd be surprised. But yeah,
lasted from 1980, when Iran was at its lowest point in many decades, when the Shah had been deposed, when half the officer corps had been executed and the other half was languishing in prison, when everyone assumed the Islamist regime that is now the IRI would be a short-term bunch of hicks who would be replaced by the cosmopolitans. Instead, the cosmopolitans went to prison or the firing squads. Even the Iranian Communist Party, the Tudeh, saw in their rather excessively linear way, they saw Khomeini as a step to an end to the inevitable proletarian revolution. Well, that didn't happen. And the U.S. Took its revenge via Saddam, who was sort of a friend at the time, and shared satellite information with the Iraqi command, shared weapons with the Iraqi command, and gave it every encouragement to go invade this paralyzed, helpless Iraq. We could go through a long history of the war, but cut to 8 years later, Saddam is begging for peace. The Iranian army is now on Iraqi soil in some places. The Iraqi invading army, with all that American satellite help, with all that Soviet training and all that armor-heavy advancing forces, penetrated a few miles into Iraq. The expected minority ethnic uprisings did not occur, and the attack never got anywhere near the northeastern plateau where the majority of the ethnic Iranian population resides. It was a complete disaster and left the Iraqis terrified. I talked to an Iranian veteran of the war about what it was like on the front lines, and he just laughed and said, they were terrified of us. And when you have a side that is willing to do human wave attacks to clear minefields and then has troops in reserve to cross the minefields once they've been cleared, you have reason to be terrified. So Iran is basically not invadable. The idea of an invasion of Iraq is bullshit. The idea of a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia is even bigger nonsense. Saudi Arabia is as fragile as a moon colony. And so are the Gulf states on the eastern side of what Iranians call the Persian Gulf, what Arabs prefer to call the Arab Gulf. Let's just call it the Gulf. Those countries are destroyable with surface-to-surface missiles, and those happen to be the weapons in which the Iranian military excels most of all, and they also happen to be the weapons which the U.S. military, which has invested heavily in human-piloted fighters, aircraft carriers, and other gold-plated weapons, does not want to think about. The U.S. Navy has no plan for a swarm of surface-to-surface anti-ship missiles, except one of these days we will have lasers that work. They have been saying that since I was a hardware nerd, and that means...
What about the rail gun?
Oh, yeah.
The rail gun?
Hey, it killed that giant transformer in Dark of the Moon.
Yeah, there's the railgun. It used to be a bad guy when Saddam was going to get it, and then Mossad killed everybody who was involved in that project, and now it's going to get us out of trouble. But even a railgun needs reloading, and surface-to-surface missiles are cheap and easy to make. And when you're dealing with the gigantic targets that Iran has to face, you don't need to aim that perfectly. What you need is numbers, because the U.S. has designed weapons which can't be dismissed as bad, but are meant for an imaginary Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, in which human-piloted planes would be the main aerial weapon. That means that the Patriot missile is a good weapon if you want to use its fragmentation warhead to bring down an incredibly fragile Soviet fighter bomber jet, because those things are unbelievably easy to kill. A Scud is not easy to kill. It's not even guided. It's your 8th grade geometry problem. You fire it at an arc with X amount of fuel, and you can predict within a very broad range where it's going to land. And if you're aiming, say, at a Saudi port on the Gulf, which contains some of the most fragile technology in the world, oil refineries, basically tubes full of explosive liquids, desalination plants, tubes full of the water that keeps the hugely overpopulated Arabian Peninsula alive, and which would soon die of thirst without them. You don't need a super accurate Scud. And if the U.S. has a total inventory of 10,000 Patriot missile, if everyone hit its target in a mass surface-to-surface attack on the east coast of Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, is Shia and not too thrilled about being under Saudi Arabia in the first place, they might hit their targets. Some of them, because some have been designed comically enough with a revised warhead, which is now just, and I kid you not, a gigantic cylinder of lead. Because the idea is these little fragmentation warheads just don't do anything to a Scud. It's like the Scud comes up in its little parabola, fragmentation warhead goes off, Scud goes, I think some mosquito just hit me. So
it's like a fist that'll just punch it out of the air.
Yeah, or at least deflect its course.
I mean, yeah, think how hard a physics problem that is.
Yeah. And how easy a physics problem it is to design a new model Scud. And Iran has been designing bigger and better and longer range, some guided, some unguided, surface-to-surface missiles for decades, getting some of the technology through North Korea, some through, God knows, Ukraine. There was a time when you could buy anything in Ukraine and the Soviet Union. The CIA bought most of it, but I really doubt they bought all of it. And all you have to do is create a sufficient number that you can overwhelm these Patriot batteries, because it takes a while to reload a Patriot. It usually carries groups of 4 missiles to reload, and you cannot say, wait, hold on, we're reloading. This is not a war that has to be fought fair. So the idea of even fighting a proxy war on behalf of Saudi Arabia against Iran is a lie. And it's a lie that's being peddled to a lot of people. The idea of an invasion of Iran is more than a lie, it's a joke.
They should get some of those S-400s. I hear those are much better than the. They're bigger. I think. I think what you need in a coming war is quantity, because the coming war, quantity and variety, because the coming war, and this is something the U.S. has been as slow to realize as the Spanish tercios were to realize before the Battle of Rocroi disillusioned them in a hurry. When you have a successful technology, and since 1945 we've had what seems to be a sufficient successful technological mix, there's a huge interest in not disturbing it. But what do you do about drones, for example? Drones are already in use by people with very low technical level. The Houthis got a bunch of drones, right?
Yeah, the Houthis have drones. Islamic State had drones. All you need is a little drone to go over the target, and you wave down to them and flip a switch, which releases a catch, which releases a grenade, and you have the world's cheapest air force. We are not used to that. We are used to having complete air superiority. So to shoot down drones, you need a mass of tiny little, hornet size.
A giant butterfly net.
Yeah. A net might work too, but you need a whole bunch of new technology. To shoot down giant parabolic regional missiles, you need much bigger weapons.
So, John, I mean, obviously the people whose job it is to know this shit at the Pentagon or at think tanks or whatever, they can't be unaware of this. There must be people who realize, like you said, that the idea of the United States going to war with Iran is a joke. It would destroy our military, and this is a war we would lose, and lose badly, despite how powerful, despite all the money and the technology that we have. Again, the average American soldier, think about that. What, invading Iran? So he can get, as Felix likes to say, get a communications degree back in America? They really want to die for this? I mean, or it was bad enough in Iraq when they just became the cops of Baghdad, basically getting picked off by IEDs and taking it out on the local population. I mean, Iran is 100 times worse than that.
Yeah. Iran is designed as a fortress. I mean, mountain ranges, surrounding a central plateau where the most important population lives. How did you even get to Tehran? I mean, remember, the U.S. has tried to get to Tehran. That was way back during the Carter years when the U.S. military had a slight infatuation with other militaries, Soviet and Israeli at once. So they wanted to do an Israeli-style Entebbe raid to free the hostages in Tehran. They didn't get anywhere near Tehran, and these were the best of the best. It's ridiculous.
So they must know that, but at the same time, like I said, at the highest echelons of the American foreign policy wonks and think tanks, this is like I said, the holy grail for them. They still have this idea that we're going to do regime change in Iran, and it's just like, is it insanity or is it a bluff? Like what accounts for this? Because these people keep talking about how look, I've actually noticed now that even they are kind of aware of the idea that they are not going to sell the American people on another wholesale land invasion of a country like Iran after they blew it all in Iraq. But they keep saying things like, we need to get tough with Iran, or there needs to be a response, or we have to show toughness because if we don't respond, then weakness will invite more aggression from the Iranians or whatever. It's just like, is it just insanity, or is it just bluster, or what are these people after?